Today on the British Chamber of Commerce Presents Afternoon Tea with, we have Melanie Warnes, CEO and Principal of the British School of Brussels.
About 1,400 students from about 70 nationalities, aged 1 to 18. So a lovely, diverse group. Chocolate, beer, and Tintin. I mean, that those sorts of things. But I feel that with the culture and ethos of Brussels and Belgium, in harmony with my professional work at a fabulous business to run and a great school to be in. How could I not be happy?
Welcome everybody to the British Chamber of Commerce Presents Afternoon Tea with. We're a series where we look to explore the professional and personal experiences of some key and very notable figures working in and around Brussels. So we're really, really pleased today to have joining us for afternoon tea, Melanie from the British School of Brussels. So Melanie Warnes, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Really, really happy to be here talking to you. So I came to Belgium in 2016 from the UK, where I was previously leading an academy group of schools of primary and secondary, and I was the CEO and executive head teacher of that group. And I came here to head up the BSB, which we're just located in Tervuren on the edge of Brussels, about 1,400 students from about 70 nationalities, aged 1 to 18. So a lovely, diverse group, families and children, and a great business to be running and developing. So that's the shortest version. Came here with my husband, who I was saying to you earlier is a poet. So he's not in the world of business at all.
Something I love about education is I think there's predominantly this consensus that creativity is not necessarily so obvious within education. And so it's great that you clearly have that background of acknowledging how important creativity is. And in your position, I'm sure you can really do something bringing that to the school.
Well, I think it's really, really interesting you raised that, because obviously creativity is a real strong feature of the school. So there's the vibrant music, the great sport, and all those things that we might immediately associate with creativity, great writers and speaking. But also, I think one of the things that really attracted me to being here at BSB is that I get this lovely job of being the principal, but also being the CEO of the company. So that wonderful freedom to be really entrepreneurial and creative in that socially entrepreneurial and creative way as well, which is a great blend of the job and is one of the reasons why I was interested in it in the first place. So I think in terms of flourishing and settling, it's that great balance between one's personal life being a little oasis from the work, but also that the values and the ways that you like to live are complemented, because I think that's one of the things I really noticed. So coming to live and work in this international community. So although I'd done lots of international work, so some consultancy around the world to do with education and leadership, this is the first time that quite advanced in years in my career that I'd had the opportunity to really made the decision as a family that we would come and live and work somewhere else.
On that point, what were your ideas about Brussels? I mean, I know in the UK, when you mention the word Brussels, it generates a lot of feelings. So both positive and negative, depending on who you talk to. Yeah. So what were your preconceived ideas of and what it might be like coming to Brussels?
Well, it's really interesting because it is that, and I'm not saying that I held those stereotypes, but if you name, and I do recall when I told some friends and families where I was going and where I'd got the job, I think some of them were hoping I was going to say Rome or Madrid or Barcelona or the south of France, and suddenly they'd all be staying for holidays. And when you say Belgium and Brussels, obviously the time that I came to join here in 2016, obviously it was very associated with the Commission and the European Union and Brexit and all of those things, but also Belgium is not sort of, if you ask anybody in the UK, I'm making a huge generalisation here, it doesn't roll off the tongue as a top 10 tourist destination. So I think it was, for me, I didn't actually know that much about Belgium or Brussels, if I'm really honest, apart from the obvious of, chocolate beer and Tintin. I mean, that, those sorts of things. And for me, it was I think the job was the first draw, and then it was checking out, yet I'm going to be really happy in that job, but obviously you've got to have a personal life as well. Will where the role is located, will that be the right place for us as a family? And the two things go hand in hand, much more than that I ever felt that in the UK. For me, is that as an expat, the world of your work and the world of your personal life, which I've always kept quite apart, are much more blended.
Right.
And because your social network, you go from I went from a really well-established social network, living in the same place for 20 years, to, well, my network was my colleagues at work. So I would think that we chose really carefully. Everybody chooses carefully where to live. We made a conscious decision that we would live in the city, so in Brussels, not completely central, but we wanted a sort of urban village. We wanted a community in its own right, but to be in the city so that we could do the things that we love doing. So, theatre, restaurants, music. And I think we knew that Belgium and Brussels was going to be really good for that. I don't think we quite realised just how much.
That brings us onto that question. So you got here, and how did Brussels, and especially, I guess it's commonly referred to as the Brussels bubble, right?
Yeah,
There's sort of that community within a community. How did that meet your expectations? And maybe do you have any professional or even personal experiences that you think kind of highlight what that was? And even, do you recognize the Brussels bubble, as they call it, or?
I do sometimes, but I think I think sometimes it's overstated. For me, and thinking about why does Brussels work for me personally, and then I'll say about professionally, is personally, I think as a capital city, I wasn't prepared for just how personable and sort of human scale things are, because I was thinking London, that was my main picture of a capital city, and Athens and other places that I know really well. And so I think there's that human scale. This is a real cliche, but it's true, is this sort of immediate, I know that sometimes people say, the Belgians are a bit reserved. We've not found that. I find it remarkable how people just greet in the street, and are openly warm and friendly. We found it just very human. I was amazed. I'll give you an example. When we were first here, and you're doing all the things that an expat is to do, set up the telephone account, blah, 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 all of those things, working with the relocation agents, all the rest of it. I was amazed at how often, you could just pick up the phone and talk to somebody. I found that's what I mean by human scale. That's my experience. I think the thing that I would say as a piece of advice would be to decide to live locally and really live locally. So, we made a conscious decision to live, in a French-speaking area. I've come with no language for French, so actually, okay, well, we're going to learn it, and make those conscious decisions rather than living. I think what I think is more, I notice is more as expat bubbles rather than the Brussels bubble. Right. So trying to integrate as far as one can, without being naive about that. So I haven't found that with Brussels. I think I find it remarkable how recognisable people are. That I go on the metro and I see people I know, and that I find interesting. I think the political centre of Brussels, I think, can become a bubble, but that's no different to that in any country. I think I'm not in that in the same way. So it's odd, isn't it? Because our business is a Belgian business, so it's a VZW, but obviously my business runs in English. So I'm in an English-speaking environment for most of my professional day, but in this context that's not British. So that's a really interesting interesting mix. You know, with 70 nationalities in the school. So we are, in that sense, it's representative of the diversity, the diversity of Brussels, definitely, and all of those things that it brings. So it was a personal decision to not live on the doorstep of the school. It's also something about wanting to enjoy the opportunity to be in a cosmopolitan city, and that bit it's not disappointed at all. So and we wanted to live in a community where we would also know our neighbours, which we do. The area that I live in is really mixed like that, but also quite settled. And we wanted to be in that sort of mixed environment. And I think that's really important. But obviously, a lot of the, if you think about families, so expat families coming to work here, especially if they're with children, the most important thing that those families need is the right school for their child. So a lot of the families that are at the school, irrespective of their nationality, will choose to live near the school because, the school day runs until nearly 7 in the evening. So there's all those things, and it's to do with the friendship and the group of the family. And it's really important to us that those families, that their child is really happy and settled really well, and that the family settles really well, because that's really important to them settling in Belgium, isn't it? Is that if the children are happy, because the education is really important to those parents, and they don't have if you think about somewhere, if you live in your local community and you've always lived there, and the grandparents went to the same local school or whatever, there's a connection, there's a rootedness with the local school, and that just doesn't happen with the vast majority of the expats, who the children may only be here for 2 or 3 years. So we have to make really rapid connections, because we know if that particular child, if they don't settle well within 2 or 3 weeks, then that family isn't going to settle well. So it's a really symbiotic relationship, isn't there, between the business of BSB in the context of other businesses, but also that we as a business serve so many of the companies, embassies, NATO, etc., where it's really crucial that those staff, those employees' children settle well, because that's going to reflect on how happy those employees are when they're in their workplace. And I think that's something that's makes for a real richness, and it puts a good pressure on a school to get that choice well, to get it right.
You've already given us a word of advice or two, but what would you say if, and let's maybe look at it from the perspective of like a life hack, so I know that's incredibly popular these days. I've been onto TikTok recently, so I'm picking up all the TikTok lingo.
Careful.
Well, that's for another show completely. What would you say would be a life hack for those people that are potentially thinking about coming to Brussels, or those people that are recently here? What is it that proper advice that you'd give to those people thinking about being here, and what are the things they really need to consider?
I think one of the things that I would say really consider, I'd give this advice, and this might only be relevant to those people in I don't think it's just for the people in the education world internationally at all, is a really notice between actually whether one wants to be in an expat bubble. If you want to be in an expat bubble, then I don't think Brussels and Belgium is the right place to be. If you want to be in a truly international environment and live as a member of that international community, and not be gated, but then I think Brussels and Belgium is superb for that. And that certainly matched my expectations of coming in, because much as I'm proud to be British and so forth, I don't necessarily why work internationally if you only want to be with people like yourself.
Right.
And I would say that one of the things that is so remarkable and rich and exciting about being in, and I keep using the word Brussels and Belgium interchangeably, so Brussels is what I know better than Belgium as a whole. So if I talk about Brussels, is that diversity, and that actually, in my professional life, are mixing with so many different nationalities and different people and different cultures. And in my personal life, you know, if I just think about my neighbours and those small conversations I have every day, or the culture that one can partake of, then that's not gated. That's not so I would say that's distinctly different to working as an expat in some other parts of the world, as a broad generalization.
So when coming here, integrate fully, not just with the expat bubble, but also to this fabulously beautiful international environment.
Just incredible.
Including Belgians, by the way. I think Belgians are beautiful people as well.
Yeah, incredibly. And and half of my my senior team are Belgian nationals as well. So it's like a real mix. And I think as well, it's that I think the other thing I would say is to give Brussels, and I think it's typical from talking to colleagues, Belgian and non-Belgian colleagues, is to give a bit of time to work its magic on you. So it's not I think Brussels particularly is not a city that's immediately in your face. Insofar as, you know, if you go to London, if you go to Paris, people can describe the top 10 sites to see in those places and all the rest of it. And I think one of the things I like about Brussels is that there's a slight self-confidence to say, well, just come and find us. You have to work a little harder. There's nothing flash. There's a subtlety. There's things about quality. I think, you know, we go to a lot of music concerts and gigs, and some of the best music I've ever heard, I've heard at concerts in Brussels, and I love the sort of informality of things.
Thank you. Melanie, I'd like to thank you very much for joining me for afternoon tea. That was
It's
very
been a pleasure.
And thanks for sharing your wisdom. I look forward to seeing you soon.
Yeah, and you.
All the best.
Bye-bye,
Melanie.
Bye.